online gambling in South Africa, clarity, risk, and what comes next.
Thanks, everyone. Welcome to an IMGL Masterclass. So IMGL is International Masters of Gambling Law, which I'm a South African member of. It's a leading organization of gambling lawyers around the world. We've got members from every continent who are the leading specialists in the field from around the world. We also have regulators and educators, and it's a tremendous organization to have been a part of for the best part of 20 years. I'm going to just ask the panelists to introduce themselves very quickly, and we'll sort of go around in order, and then we'll get kicking.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vusi Mtsweni, Chief Executive Officer at the Mpumalanga Economic Regulator. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Coleman. I represent the South African Bookmakers Association.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alicia Gibson. I run a gaming law and compliance consultancy, and I also have 10 years background as a regulator as well.
Hi, I'm Heathcliff Farrugia. I'm responsible for international relations at Sigma, and I also have years of experience. I was the regulator at the MGA, I think 6 years ago now.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. So I think we need to set the scene a little bit, because if you have a look at the topic, it's about sort of where we are on online gambling in South Africa, questions of clarity, risk, and what comes next, which is incredibly topical at the moment. In the last few years, the online gambling scene in South Africa has really grown tremendously. Roughly, I would say, 4/5 of the GGR generated in the gambling industry is coming from online betting modalities. These are being offered through licensed bookmakers across the country. The legal position has been the subject of some lack of clarity for a while. For some, it's very, very clear. That would be the provincial licensing authorities as well as the industry participants. Unfortunately, at this moment in time, national government and the industry participants and the PLAs are not necessarily quite ad idem on it, and that may be a little bit of an understatement. There's been quite a lot of pressure that's been coming over some time, some of it, I would say, conventional and within the ordinary development of the gambling industry, as we've seen overseas. You know, those are increased focus on advertising, increased focus on player responsibility, and unfortunately now we've also got a National Treasury proposal for a layered tax at what I would consider, and others may not, a punitive rate over and above the existing taxes. So let's just go into a couple of the things before we get into the panel comments. What we've seen in the last few months is a report, the annual report by the National Gambling Board, which has indicated that there's a substantial growth in online betting in South Africa, a concern that there has been a substantial growth in problem gambling at the same time, but also an assertion that the current state of affairs is not in keeping, and the permissions that have been granted by the provincial licensing authorities is not in keeping with the National Gambling Act. We, very shortly after that report was published, had a Supreme Court of Appeal judgment in the Superbets matter, which was confined to the Gauteng province, but in which a 3-judge bench of the Supreme Court of Appeal held that Section 4 of the National Gambling Act, which is something very relevant here, describes how a bookmaker bet is taken, but that it is up to the provincial licensing authorities to determine the type of bet that may be taken within the context of the bookmaker license. We also know constitutionally that provinces may differ from province to province without any constitutional issue. Not that long afterwards, National Treasury puts out a proposal for a discussion paper to levy a 20% gambling tax at a national level based on 20% of GGR on the basis in addition to the current taxes. And as early as late last week and early this week, the National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications has issued a directive also echoing the language that online casino-style betting being offered by bookmakers is illegal in terms of the National Gambling Act, and that remote gambling servers will no longer be certified by the NRCS. So, that's where we are. And as you can imagine, that's created a tremendous degree of uncertainty in the industry, and one which will hopefully be resolved. So, we've got a fantastic panel because we've got Vusi, who has been one of the foremost regulators at a provincial level in really creating the growth that has happened in the industry, particularly in the online betting space. We've got Sean, who is the CEO of the South African Bookmakers Association, which represents many, many bookmakers and the interests of the bookmaker groups in South Africa. We have Alicia, who is an incredibly experienced lawyer and ex-regulator in this industry, and Heathcliff, who has been on the MGA and is involved with Sigma from an international perspective. So, having set the scene, Vusi, as really one of probably two of the primary regulators in this country dealing with this and having been involved with the permissions to allow your licensees to carry online casino-style games or betting on casino-style games and other contingencies. What's your view on this? Where do we go?
Thank you, Garron. I think for starters, when as a PLA we allow a particular game to be played, when we give approval to certain equipment, we have to make sure that everything we do is in line with the prescripts or the intentions of the legislation. This issue of the contingencies, I know it's been in everybody's lips, because for starters, we started by saying what exactly is the contingency. And then from there, you go into the legislation itself, you look into fixed odd bets, you look into what is a gambling game. So you look into all of those so that you can arrive at a conclusion to say, can I be able to regulate this with the current legislation that I have? So, and secondly, what you do if you are uncertain. There are learned people like your good self from the legal fraternity with Alicia Gibson, and you consult those people and you say, here's my legislation, here's the national legislation. Give me your view in terms of what is it? Can I be able to regulate this type of equipment? So that has always been our approach in as far as regulating. I think for me, the issue of illegal operators, to say definitely illegal operators are there, and somebody is saying what is currently happening with the contingencies and also the illegal online space, that is what is probably increasing the harm. With regards to the illegals, I will always going to say, has anybody done a research to say the illegals are they not the ones that are causing harm in as far as online betting is concerned? So for me, original, I can say that the intention of the legislative framework has been to make sure that gambling is conducted within a controlled environment. And so now what has happened is that the growth in as far as online gambling is concerned, probably keeping pace with that has led to this growth and also this problem. So I would say for me, currently the issues at hand, I know you've touched base on the issue of the tax, the 20% tax. The issue of the tax for me it's a question of saying consultation is very key. It is very key because you have to make sure that all the parties that are involved, you are looking at your intergovernmental framework. You need to be able to discuss. You need to be able to consult. Because now, if you are going to talk about taxing the illegals, what are you saying? You are saying, I can tax people that are selling drugs. That is exactly what you are just saying to us. Because you cannot, because I don't think even FIC can be able to allow you to be able to go onto that route. And then on the 20% tax now, another thing that is being said, you are talking about harm reduction. But where is that revenue going to go? You have a structure that was set up. You have NRGP that was set up to collect, to make sure that they are in control of, or they address the issues of problem gambling. But now we are going to collect the 20%. Are you going to send that 20% to NRGP because it's a structure? The only question now I had, are you disregarding the provincial legislation? I think the problem in all of these things, we are forgetting about the issue of concurrency. That is the main issue. In all of these issues that you were talking about, concurrency has always been the problem. But I still stand by my decision to say contingencies are within the legislation of Mpumalanga. I think the Gauteng case, it was blown out of proportion because if all the provinces were cited in that case, then probably I would say we can be in agreement. But as things stand, nobody was cited. It was only about one province. So we should stick with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Vusi. Sean, and really, you know, we're definitely going to come back to touch on a couple of these things which I've jotted down some notes on. Sean, you represent, as an organization, over 100 bookmakers in the country. Without any doubt, it's the biggest bookmaker organization in the country. And, I mean, what are you hearing from your members? Obviously, you've got your own view, but, I mean, what's the feel around all of this? What are people thinking?
From our industry perspective, I mean, we're united and pretty much in line with the PLAs, and that foundation is based on what really is fundamental to understand in this quagmire that's developed, really, and that's to understand the use of these terms interactive gaming and online betting, and sometimes the reliance on the play of those words that causes confusion. It causes confusion in the market. It causes a degree of instability and a lot of uncertainty. And so I think it needs to be responsible when regulators need to be responsible when they start to talk about interactive gaming is illegal. Now, that's common cause. Nobody's at odds with that. We all are pushing in the same direction because that largely points to the illegal market. And we have a problem with the illegal market in this country when 50 billion rand continues to walk out of this economy and go overseas. And so we've asked national government in our submissions on the online tax to rather have a look and focus on bringing that money back on shore through a channelization process that we're achieving in some shape or form with regards to the increase in turnovers and taxes that the online guys are enjoying. And most importantly, and to underline this, interactive gaming, in its definition in the National Gambling Act, excludes a fixed odds bet. So we can never be in a situation where fixed odds betting even touches any part of the definition of interactive gaming. In fact, it's a specific exclusion. So building on from that premise that fixed odds betting is not interactive gaming, contingency betting, which I don't want this to be an interpretive session, but I think it's important to make these points. A fixed odds contingency is an event or occurrence, the outcome of which is unknown at the time that the bets are struck. So all of these game opportunities exactly fits into that definition. And what I'm finding at the moment is I don't think that there's been sufficient argument from the national regulator to overturn those statutory definitions. So now what we're finding and what we're experiencing is an attempted technical attack via the standards as to what can and cannot be tested to try and derail the gains that have been made in the fixed odds space and within the betting industry.
I think, let me ask you this. From, you touched on questions of responsible gambling, or let me ask you this actually about responsible gambling and that, because, much of what is being said is there's been this incredible growth in problem gambling, although we don't quite know how those figures are compiled, but let's just assume on the face of it there's been a growth in problem gambling. I'm not saying
really.
there is or not, but
not really.
Okay, so it's something you and I have spoken about. So that's what I wanted to sort of touch on as far as, how you view that from a bookmaker association, because you've looked at this and commissioned your own sort of studies about the market and everything in the past.
Yeah, I mean, so we commissioned a study in 2024, but that was more targeted at the illegal market to try and bring a quantum to that illegal market and to bring the illegal market into the regulatory conversation and into the taxation conversation. But in our recent submissions to Treasury on this proposed online tax, we had an engagement with the South African Responsible Gambling Foundation, and we asked them for statistics. And I mean, some of the stuff that came back was astounding. Yes, there's an increase in calls that the Responsible Gambling Foundation are receiving, but those are more operator-based calls. In excess of 80% of those calls are people phoning in to complain that they can't get their money from the operator. It's got nothing to do with actual gambling harm or seeking counseling or anything like that. They actually are misplaced calls to the foundation. So to openly go and make comments in your discussion paper about increases in call volumes and those things, we actually went and got the statistics from the South African Responsible Gambling Foundation because we wanted to be making a responsible submission ourselves to Treasury to say, well, that in fact is not the case. The gambling harm hasn't really increased. But at the same time, as more people are gambling online, and I think we're all at idem with that, there's going to be a concomitant increase in the number of people that may be the subject of gambling harm. So with that increase, you might see an increase. But the statistics are not certainly alarming in any shape or form, and that really does come from the horse's mouth. And then also to say, as I said on a talk show this morning, for 20 years, the industry has been a public-private sector participant in the South African Responsible Gambling Foundation. And our operators responsibly contribute 0.1% of their gross gaming revenue to fund the South African Responsible Gambling Foundation. And so we're aware of the harm, the potential harm that's out there. Money is contributed in conjunction with the PLAs because in a lot of the provinces it's a license condition, which is embraced by the industry and never resisted. And that money finds its way into the funding of the Responsible Gambling Foundation, where that money is utilized for problem gamblers or for gamblers who seek counseling. And so that relationship is ongoing.
Thanks, Sean. You want to say something, Vusi?
Yeah, I think in terms of the issues that are at hand, the issue for me that is a problem for the regulators, I will definitely say the amount of advertising that is honestly taking place out there. And then two, the issues of illegal, unlicensed operators that are coming to the shore. Those, for me, are the issues, if currently, for me, that needs to be addressed. And also, we cannot postpone the issue of legislating online gambling per se, because I can't even remember since when, even 2010, before 2010, when we were talking about regulating online gambling. And even now, we're still all over trying to regulate online gambling. And nobody thought before we were going to have your cryptocurrencies. Nobody thought before we were going to have your Bitcoins. So the market is really evolving. So if we don't move with the issue of legislating online gambling, we are always going to have this discussion whereby there is disagreements between the PLAs and national in terms of the regulation of online gambling. All we need is to make sure that there is legislation. We are able to go forward with the regulation of online gambling.
Thanks, Vusi. Alicia, the lawyer and regulator in the room, to break it down for us from a legal perspective and what you think the possible solutions are.
Well, thanks, Garron. Good afternoon, everyone. Look, Garron, the devil is in the detail, as it always is. If you are not a purist about the law, then you are not a lawyer. And if you are a regulator, as I was for 10 years, and you could take one thing away from this panel, the thing to take away from it is that you are the product of your legislation. You as a regulator are shaped by the legislation which was passed by the provincial legislature. And that legislation tells you exactly what the boundaries of your powers are. So if somebody, a license holder, a member of the public, anybody, any industry stakeholder comes to you and says, I want you to do this, I want you to do A, or I want you to do B, then the simple retort that you'll never go wrong if you do this as a regulator is to say, show me the section, show me the provision in the Act which gives me the power to do this. So you look for the bounds of your powers within the four corners of your legislation and nowhere else. And if you go beyond those four corners, then you're acting unlawfully, and whatever decisions you're making are going to be ultra vires. And that is something which has occupied our courts over many, many years in many actions and litigation that has been instituted against various regulators in this country. And inevitably, that is going to be the final answer to the question, are you applying your legislation? So now we must apply that to the discussion we're having here. So what is it? Why is there this muddy water? Why are there people who should be in the shallow end, because this is a shallow end argument, and are flailing in the depths without a life jacket? And it's a simple matter of interpretation, proper interpretation of legislation, which in fact is very clear. The National Gambling Act, Section 4 of the National Gambling Act, I must mention, before I mention that everything that has happened in the past couple of weeks, all the directives which have reportedly been given, and the issue of the overlay tax on a national level, are all based on one single assumption. And it's a very, very bold assumption, given the legislation. And that assumption is that bookmakers, licensed bookmakers in South Africa, who are offering fixed odds betting on casino-style games or other similar games, are acting unlawfully. That they are, in fact, somehow offering interactive gambling. They are engaging in interactive gambling. And that simply is not true. It's not true for a very simple reason. And that is Section 62A of the National Gambling Act, which tells you in terms that a bet or a wager taken with a licensed bookmaker is not a gambling game. If you go back to the definition of interactive gambling, an interactive game, in the National Gambling Act, Section 1 of the National Gambling Act, you are told that an interactive game is a gambling game. So if a bet or a wager is explicitly said to be not a gambling game, then quite clearly what bookmakers are doing is not engaging in interactive gambling.
Far more eloquently put than I did.
Yeah, and me too. And of course, we've now got a full bench of the Supreme Court of Appeal that agrees with that.
Yes, and I think that the point of that Supreme Court of Appeal decision is that it was very much centered on the position in Gauteng, because Gauteng is unusual legislation when it comes to the contingencies on which bookmakers may offer betting. And that is, it's limited to horse racing and sporting events.
And beauty contests, for some other reason.
And beauty contests, which are included in the definition of a sporting event.
Yes.
Yes.
Have you backed a Miss South Africa winner, Garron?
No, because I'm not in Joburg.
So there is no scope for argument regarding this. If you look at your own legislation, and that's what I'm saying when I'm talking about what regulators need to take home. You need to take home that central lesson, because it's a lesson that's being taught over and over and over again, and somehow it seems to slide into the background. So do what your legislation says you may do. And that brings me to something else, and that is the directives which have now purportedly been given, well, not purportedly, because in fact we know that this has indeed happened, by the NGB to provincial licensing authorities, that they must now, not only by the NGB, but also by the National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications, to the effect that testing on remote gambling service must stop, and a sort of assortment of other related directives that are apparently aimed at ensuring that PLAs fall into line and make sure that they comply with the applicable legislation. So those directives have, unfortunately, no basis in law either. They are said to have been issued in terms of Section 33 and Section 34 of the National Gambling Act. But in fact, if you go, as I said once again, you go to the four corners of that legislation and you look at what it says. Section 33 and Section 34 of the National Gambling Act do not empower the NGB to issue directives of this kind to license holders. So there's a very flimsy legal basis for the developments that have been occurring to date. And Vusi had mentioned something that I think is quite important. And that is that a lot of what we're talking about goes to the underlying question of concurrence, concurrent jurisdiction as between the national parliament on the one hand and provincial legislatures on the other in relation to the subject of casinos, racing, gambling and wagering. It's important to bear in mind, if you're thinking about things from a legal perspective, that the National Gambling Act, the very reason for the enactment of the National Gambling Act, and you'll see it in the preamble to that act, is to harmonize the exercise of concurrent jurisdiction. And that would be something that I would like to make an appeal in respect of today. And my appeal is to the NGB, to PLAs, to industry, to take this matter forward in a constructive manner and to try and move away from the troubled conversation that we've been having regarding this subject, when in fact the legal position is clear. You take your legislation, you work on your legislation, you read your legislation, you apply your legislation. If you don't like your legislation, have it amended. Simple as that.
Thanks, Alicia. That's phenomenal. Well, the response is there, and I completely concur, obviously, as a colleague as well. I think that, the interpretation is 100% correct. Heathcliff, I know you're sitting right in the end there. You've been a regulator, you've been in the industry for ages. What do you make of all this sort of tension that we're seeing around various touch points? You've no doubt seen it before.
Yeah, what we see even through Sigma, since obviously Sigma will do 8 summits across the globe, so we have 5 continents, and we always have regulatory discussions wherever we go. However, one thing which is common in a number of countries is, even here we're discussing it, the fact that we are discussing or debating whether or not we should regulate online gaming or these kind of discussions. But the feedback on this is that whether or not you regulate, whether or not you acknowledge it, whether or not you accept it, online gaming is happening already. So it is a matter of deciding whether or not you want to know what's happening, whether or not you want it to be regulated properly, whether or not you want to make sure that you know who are the players who are unfortunately having problem gambling issues, whether or not you want the government or the local government to get the due taxes But gambling is happening already. Online gambling is happening everywhere. But thinking that anyone can, I don't know through which means, control online gambling by simply saying, okay, it's illegal. Okay, yes, fine. I don't think it can happen, because what we've seen, I mean, I've seen this even in Brazil. So we've seen this in Brazil. So Brazil, when we had our summit last April, it was pretty much just the right time, because Brazil had started regulating online gambling. But before that, I mean, sports betting, online sports betting in Brazil happened already, big time. There were huge amounts of gambling, millions, billions going there already. But the government was making zero of that. Why? Because all of it was going illegal. And we all know that what can happen to an industry if it goes illegal. How can you know whether or not there are AML regulations, whether a player is being protected? Nobody has any idea, because it grows illegally. So I would say it's the Wild West when it grows illegally. So unless governments acknowledge this and decide that the only way forward, so for me there isn't even a discussion. Regulation is the only way forward. I also had this discussion at the Graph Forum this morning. Regulation is the only way forward. Trying to think that by banning, by making something illegal, it will simply disappear, unfortunately, it is not the case, whether we like it or not. Regulating, and not just regulating for the sort of just to regulate. You need to regulate properly. You need to have proper discussions with the industry, even regulators. Usually a problem with regulators, it happened to me even when I was in my early days in the industry. You start having conversations with individuals when you speak to the industry who are 10 times more knowledgeable than you. Why? Because they are in the industry. They know exactly how things happen. They know how the technology works. They can tell you that in the next 2-3 years, this is what will happen. If regulators simply stay in their room and start sort of coming up with these sometimes overly prescriptive regulation that by the time they get approved by Parliament, they are already outdated. So unless regulators have an open discussion with the industry will give you feedback. The industry wants to give you feedback. Proper operators, serious operators want to be regulated. Sometimes there is this, there are those who think that operators do not want to be regulated. That's not true. Serious operators want to be regulated, but want to be regulated properly. I mean, even if I give you a bit of a European perspective, without mentioning or singling out a specific country, but maybe some of you know, a particular country which used to regulate gambling properly. Now they came up with this idea of having a 40% tax. 40% tax, what will happen? What do you think will happen? 40% tax, you just made it very worth it for any legal operator. Now it's worth the risk. 40%, you say 40% if you go illegal, it's worth the risk. Let's do it illegal, then fine. Ultimately, we are all in the industry. We know how certain individuals can be creative about having these structures which make them unreachable. So regulation is the only way forward. There isn't much discussion. Regulating properly by having a proper dialogue, and that is what we are even trying to do here at Sigma. Obviously, Sigma is an international brand. We have international summits across the globe. And we try to connect policymakers, regulators, and the industry to have these discussions. We cannot avoid having these discussions and then sort of complaining after because something is not working. Let's try to anticipate. Let's try to discuss.
I totally agree. Vusi?
Yeah, I think I've said it probably before. My appeal, honestly, with all of these notices that are issued, that you only see them when you see them on the media. For me, that is what Alicia has already also said. We need to be able to sit on the table and discuss before we can rush to issue notices and all the likes, because it becomes unfair also to the PLAs if these things are not discussed, because we have our own view in as far as our own legislation is concerned, how we interpret our own legislation. So also the other parties have also got their own interpretation. So I think for me it is imperative that we sit in a table and we discuss and we resolve these things amicably, because it won't take us anywhere if we're going to keep on going to and fro in as far as these issues, and we always disagree. Thank you.
Crystal ball, guys. I know this is a tricky one. I'm actually often asked it at the moment. It really is an incredibly difficult question to answer. But where do we think this is going? I mean, I'm fairly hopeful it will get resolved ultimately, but Sean?
Well, I think, you and I've also chatted from time to time, and there's a phrase that we sort of agree on, and that, the genie's out the bottle, and it's not going to be put back. It can't be put back. So what we have to do is we have to all be responsible, and as has already been advocated, we need to get around the table with the regulators as industry and find a way to make this work with the necessary protections that are needed from a responsible gambling perspective. I mean, as an association, we've just joined the Advertising Regulatory Board, so we've had a period of self-introspection with regards to the frequency and the extent of advertising that's going on. Now, we don't speak for all members, for all bookmakers in the industry, but we certainly do for our members. So we are taking responsible steps, and building on things like the responsible gambling contributions, and now being self-regulated and taking charge of the advertising perspective. And we need to continue to work together with the regulators. I don't know in my own mind that some type of specific online act is going to really make a huge difference in terms of what's currently going on. But there are some very clever people out there, and it may bring various aspects into the regulation of the online that are currently proving difficult. I mean, there's a massive need for an overhaul of the standards because those standards were uniquely positioned into different silos, and we find ourselves, going across a couple of those at the moment. So I think where there's a will, there's a way. But as long as the industry and the majority of the PLAs are at loggerheads with the national regulator, from a policy position perspective, I think it's going to be difficult. But I think it can be overcome.
Well, I might be the grand old dame of the industry, because I'm probably older than all of you put together. But I certainly can't call myself any kind of Madam Zingara. But what I can tell you is what I've seen over almost 30 years of participation in one or other shape or form in this industry. And that is what we're feeling the consequences of now. It's a stalling of the legislative position in this country. The last piece of legislation of note was the National Gambling Act in 2004. A number of things that should have happened in the interim did not happen in the interim. And these things provide very compelling examples of what happens. And I'm back again, I know, to my point regarding the primacy and the importance of legislation as a compass that guides you from one place to the next. If you are a gaming regulator, and I have to speak from this perspective because it's the most valuable one that I can think of in this context, you have to be thoughtful, you have to be watchful, you have to be alert, you have to be proactive, you have to oversee the amendment of your legislation. You can't think that the industry is going to stop and wait for you, because it's never going to happen. The industry is going to move ahead. Products, technology, platforms, whatever your product is or your enterprise is, those things are going to keep developing. And as a responsible regulator, you need to keep pace with that. So while I am saying that what licensed bookmakers in this country are doing is certainly not illegal, certainly not unlawful, and certainly cannot be branded as unlawful interactive gaming, there will be, I'm sure, a need for legislation and the nuances of that legislation to be developed. So you can't sit on a piece of legislation like the National Gambling Act for, 23 years and expect everything's going to be chipper, because it isn't. This is like a ship. And the failure of the National Parliament all those years ago when provision was made for interactive gambling, and the regulations were required to be made within a period of 2 years. And I remember sitting that day in Parliament. You see, I told you I've seen it all.
I was there in 2008 as well, believe it or not, with that.
Sitting that day in Parliament,
Yeah.
and it was a political decision.
Yeah.
Oh, no, we can't. There was sort of anecdotal evidence regarding problem gambling, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to minimize the problem of pathological gambling, while at the same time acknowledging that it's a very small percentage of people that suffer from what true pathological gambling is. But it was a political decision not to introduce these regulations, not for Parliament declined to countenance looking at these regulations, and everything went quiet.
For 17 years.
And you can't expect the industry, you can't expect that to happen. You must expect change, and you must anticipate change, and you must make provision for change. And that is exactly what did not happen, except at a provincial level.
Yeah, and we've gotten to where we are now, partly as a result of that. And
I think for me, maybe, Alicia, your license operators, complying operators, they will try and abide by what is currently provided for in the legislation. But we must know that they are definitely going to move into jurisdictions where they can be able to do their business, where their legislation allows them to be able to do what they want to do. For me, the threat, the fear that I have, it is the unlicensed one, who are going to, in that space where there is vacuum, there's nothing happening, they are definitely going to come and infiltrate the space and offer our punters something that we cannot offer them. And then what happens to the punter? That is why now we're talking about issues of harm, problem gambling. Nobody has told us as to, in the unlicensed space, to what extent are they contributing to the problems that we have?
No, absolutely, I agree. I'm conscious of the time, and I want to ask Heathcliff, I think time-wise, where are we at?
3 minutes left.
Okay, so, and I want to get to Heathcliff as well. I mean, my personal view, and this is where I'm setting this question up for Heathcliff, is that from our experience around the world, it's almost impossible to keep the illegal market out. I mean, you know, far greater resource jurisdictions than South Africa have struggled to do so. And in fact, we've seen it's been on the increase in many of those. And my personal view is that well, it's a professional view, a healthy, well-balanced, thriving, and when I say thriving, I mean economically sustainable, profitable, regulated industry is the very best way that you have, your very best ability for parties, for players not to be channelized to the illegal market. A proper offering that's made available within healthy bounds in a regulated jurisdiction is the best weapon that one actually has to keep people playing with regulated operators where they are protected, rather than to be looking to the offshore option. Offshore will never go away. It's just not going to. I think we actually all accept that. But you can minimize it and mitigate against it as much as possible. Heathcliff, just in closing, I mean, on an international basis, I think that would be right.
If I may add, so completely agreeing with what you're saying, I think one issue I see is that at times, and this is something which is worrying in my opinion, it doesn't pay to be a regulated company, and that's bad. That's problematic for the industry. It has to be beneficial for you to be a regulated entity, not vice versa. And why do I say that? Wherever we go and wherever you look at, we have regulators now across all the world, and regulators are duly doing their job. So regulators are there to control and to regulate those who have their license. A regulator doesn't have a remit to take action on someone who's illegal.
Exactly.
Regulators is like a membership, like a club. If you are part of the club, then I can take action against you, but it is not the regulator's remit to take action on the illegal. Then who is it? Then the problem is this, that across the globe, there are regulators who have hundreds of employees totally focused on those who have a license. And if you are not in line with the regulations, you get fined. Sometimes you see €1 million fines, and fine. It's how it should be. But who is taking any similar action on the illegal? Nobody, I would say. when you speak to even sometimes police departments, they tell you, well, we have so many things to focus on, we do not, so for them it's not a priority. So whereas for the regulators, the licensed entities are 100% their priority, there is nobody who has its priority or one of the main priorities to stop the illegal gambling. And until there is that focus on that part, we will still keep having these discussions wherever we go.
Guys, that's just gone 0000 in red, so I think our time is good. Are we taking questions? No? Or yes? Are we out of time?
I think
okay, thank you so much. Thanks to the panelists. Fantastic discussion. Thank you, everyone, for being here.